The morning air in Chicago was brisk, tinged with the scent of dew and city stone. Emma Rodriguez stood across the street from the building she had dreamed of working in for years. A blend of early-century architecture and modern renovations, the structure towered with understated elegance, its limestone facade casting soft shadows on the pavement. Her heart beat with anticipation. At 29, she was finally stepping into her first day as an associate architect at Arden & West, one of the most acclaimed design firms in the country. Dressed in a neatly pressed slate gray suit and armed with her leather portfolio, Emma crossed the street, heels clicking against the sidewalk. She glanced up at the company's gold-lettered sign above the main doors. It gleamed proudly in the morning light. Arden & West Architecture and Design. A doorman held the door for a suited man ahead of her. Emma smiled, ready to follow. But before she could reach the threshold, a voice called out from a small reception booth to the right of the steps. "Miss? Excuse me, miss." Emma turned. A middle-aged woman in a navy blazer gestured through a window beside the lobby-side alcove. "Are you with the new hires?" the woman asked. "Yes, Emma Rodriguez." "First day," she replied, her smile still present but dimming. "Oh, right. New staff use the back entrance. It's just policy. You'll find the service access through the alley on Monroe. There's signage." Emma paused. "Back in trance?" she asked, confused. "Is there a check-in there?" The woman's expression didn't shift. "Yes, they'll guide you. It's just how we do things here." The tone wasn't rude, exactly, but it was dismissive, curt, practiced. Emma hesitated, uncertain whether to question it further. Instead, she simply nodded, turned away from the main doors, and followed the sidewalk toward the alley. Her reflection passed silently in the mirror-like windows of the building. Her pulse slightly quickened with something she couldn't yet name. Around the corner, Monroe Street was quieter, framed by dumpsters, faded paint, and exhaust fans humming low. Emma spotted a small metal sign near a recessed doorway that read Service Entry, Staff Access. The heavy door creaked when she pulled it. Inside, a narrow corridor extended forward, dim and surprisingly cold. The air smelled of dust and moisture, faintly metallic. Overhead, a fluorescent light flickered. It was a jarring contrast to the pristine, polished exterior she'd admired minutes earlier. Exposed pipes ran along the ceiling. The floor was industrial tile, chipped at the corners. On the left, there was a closed steel elevator. To the right, a wooden door slightly ajar revealed what looked like a storage room stacked with cardboard and broken office chairs. Emma walked forward, heels muted on the rubber mat that lined the corridor. At the far end, a small glass panel above another door read, Staff Access, Level 3. She pressed a buzzer. A few seconds later, a short man in a maintenance uniform opened it from the other side. "New hire?" he asked without ceremony. "Yes, Emma Rodriguez. 3rd floor. HR will meet you." The man didn't offer his name or smile. He simply motioned her forward and walked away. Emma entered the elevator, which rattled slightly as it rose. Inside the lift, the polished, professional atmosphere she had imagined that morning felt distant. The 3rd floor opened to a modern open-concept office, in sharp contrast to the path she'd taken. Bright lighting, minimalist furniture, and a carefully curated display of architectural models filled the space. Conversations hummed in low tones, keyboards clattered, and the air carried the scent of roasted coffee and with polish. For a moment, Emma regained her composure. This was the place she'd fought to be part of. The strange detour through the back seemed like a quirk, perhaps even a simple logistical issue, but a lingering unease followed her like a shadow. Human resources greeted her warmly enough. Her ID badge was prepared, her workstation ready. She met her manager, Heather McLean, a senior designer with a sharp gaze and short, silver blonde hair. Heather walked her around, introducing her to a few of the team leads. Each handshake was firm, polite, but oddly reserved, as if her presence was unexpected. By the afternoon, she'd set up her desk and logged into the firm's internal systems. From her assigned corner of the open floor, she had a view of the east windows, thick glass panes overlooking the edge of Millennium Park. Yet from her seat, she could also glance back toward the hallway that led to the staff break room. That same corridor connected to the elevator she had used earlier. No one else, she noticed, ever walked that way. Not once. She asked her desk mate, a tall, well-dressed man named Devin, where most people entered in the mornings. "Main entrance," he said, eyes on a screen. Emma waited a beat. "Is that just for senior staff?" Devin glanced up, puzzled. "No, everyone uses it." Emma forced a neutral nod and looked away. Maybe she had misunderstood something. Maybe it was just an outdated orientation protocol. Still, a weight had settled in her chest. By 5 o'clock, the day had blended into a haze of onboarding documents, login credentials, and polite smiles. As she packed up to leave, she noticed again that no one exited to the corridor she had arrived from. Everyone filed out to the wide, glass doors at the front, greeting the security guard, laughing together, the sunlight soft on their tailored coats. Emma lingered by her desk. A decision pulsed beneath her ribs. Then she stood and walked toward the back hallway. The industrial corridor felt colder now, more defined by the silence around it. On the way out, she paused by the door marked service entry. Her fingers brushed the metal frame. Something about this part of the building felt forgotten, not just unused, but intentionally avoided. She stepped outside into the alley. The same metallic tang hung in the air. A rusted railing traced the edge of the stairwell. A pigeon fluttered upward from a cracked gutter. The sun had dipped behind the taller buildings, casting long shadows across the brick walls. Emma turned and looked up at the building. Its grandeur remained, glowing in the golden hour light. But behind it, she now sensed a hidden layer, one not visible from the facade. Something older, buried beneath design awards and sleek renovations. She didn't have the words for it yet, but something about the detour through the back had unsettled her more deeply than she had expected. She walked away, the image of the dim corridor lingering in her mind like an unfinished sketch, waiting to be filled in. 2 weeks passed. Emma had begun to settle into the rhythms of her new position. Her desk was now decorated with a small plant, a set of neatly arranged drafting tools, and a ceramic mug from her alma mater. She had attended her first project meeting, assisted with preliminary stages of a cultural center redesign, and had even received quiet compliments on her renderings from Heather. Still, a peculiar tension lingered beneath the surface. It wasn't the pressure of a new job or the weight of high expectations. It was the building itself. More precisely, the sense of something quietly erased within it. No one ever mentioned the back hallway. In morning meetings, casual conversations, or even during informal chats over coffee in the break room, it remained absent, as though it didn't exist. Emma found herself growing increasingly aware of the silence. It wasn't just about where people entered. It was how the space had been constructed, both architecturally and socially. Certain paths were used. Others were not. Certain histories were visible. Others, it seemed, were designed to remain unseen. One rainy afternoon, while waiting for a file to download on her office terminal, Emma took out her phone and searched the building's original layout. Arden and West headquarters occupied a structure built in the early 1930s, once a private office complex designed by William Hallbrook, a well-known local architect. The facade had been maintained with minor restorations over the decades, but the interiors had been renovated extensively in the 1990s. There was little online about the original internal layout. Curious, Emma decided to look for herself. The next day, during her lunch break, she returned to the back corridor, this time without hesitation. She moved quietly past the service elevator and toward the storage room with the door she had noticed earlier. Inside, the scent of mold and aged paper thickened the air. Stacks of cardboard boxes lined the walls, some labeled with cryptic initials or numbers, others left blank. Old office furniture, outdated light fixtures, and a few cracked picture frames were piled near the corners. She pulled on a pair of gloves from her bag and began to move boxes, methodically checking each one. Most contained junk, old invoices, manuals, even floppy disks, but one in particular stood out. It was sealed with yellowing tape, its label partially obscure but marked Archives 1960 to 1970. Inside, she found a collection of folders, photographs, and a thick, leather-bound notebook covered in dust. The pages inside were handwritten, dated entries ranging from 1965 to 1969, and signed by someone named Bernard Cleary. Emma sat down on a nearby stool, her heart beating faster. The entries were not random notes, but observations, memos, and reflections. Bernard, it appeared, had been an assistant building manager. His writing detailed daily operations, delivery schedules, maintenance issues, staff records. But interspersed among the banal were jarring entries that changed the tone entirely. March 2nd, 1966, told Ms. Washington she must enter through the rear corridor from now on. She didn't protest, but her eyes told another story. The executive board doesn't want anyone from her community walking through the main lobby. June 10th, 1967, repainted the service hallway, not because it needed it, but because Mr. Garner said the colored staff area was getting too dull. No improvements for the main lobby this year. Priorities, I suppose. October 14th, 1968, new signage installed. Separate entrances for staff are now permanent. Missed the days when the building felt whole. Emma felt her stomach knot. These were not isolated anecdotes. The entries revealed a systematic separation maintained throughout the late 60s. The so-called service hallway, the one she'd been directed through, had not merely been a logistical path. It had been a racialized boundary, a corridor of exclusion. The photographs inside the folder confirmed it. Grainy black and white images of reception desks, waiting areas, and staff entrances showed distinct design differences. The front lobby gleamed with marble floors and chandeliers. The rear, labeled in one photo, employee check-in South Side staff, had narrow walls, a cracked linoleum floor, and a small clock above a plain desk. A copy of an old floor plan from 1968 revealed something else. The back hallway once held a secondary reception room, complete with chairs, a coat rack, and its own exit to Monroe Street. That space no longer existed in the current layout. Or rather, it had been walled off, perhaps buried beneath renovations and forgotten. Emma took photos of everything. Her phone's camera clicked as she documented the floor plans, the photos, the notebook pages. Then she closed the box carefully, not wanting to disturb the rest without further thought. As she stood, she noticed something else behind a stack of discarded partitions, an old bronze plaque, slightly tarnished, with the words Community Access Lounge etched into it. It matched none of the current signage in the building. By the time she returned to her desk, the rain had stopped, and the sun cast a pale light across the open office floor. She didn't speak to anyone. Her thoughts were too loud. That night, at home in her small apartment in Logan Square, Emma laid everything out on her dining table. The documents formed a puzzle of neglect, the kind no renovation could erase. She thought about the corridor again, the strange chill in the air, the sense of abandonment. Now it had a name, a purpose, and a legacy. She considered the firm's polished mission statement, printed on their website and embedded in the company brochures, designing for all communities, shaping inclusive spaces. The irony sat heavy on her chest. Over the next few evenings, Emma returned to the storage room. She found more files. Some pertained to tenant applications from the 1950s and 1960s. Others included letters of complaint, often from African American or Latino employees, expressing frustration at not being permitted to use the main facilities. Many of them were left unanswered. On one of the final days of her search, Emma discovered a yellowed envelope tucked between two folders. Inside was a black and white photograph of 6 individuals, 3 women, 3 men, standing in front of the rear entrance. Their expressions were serious but dignified. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, "First cohort of black professionals hired, 1965. Told not to enter through the front." Emma stared at the image, then slipped it into her own file of copies. These were not just architectural artifacts. They were pieces of buried truth, a segregated past that stood in direct contrast to the firm's current narrative. The discovery left her restless. At work, she noticed more. The way older staff avoided questions about the building's past. The way certain parts of the firm's history were celebrated, awards, famous clients, prestigious publications, while others were conspicuously absent. A curated legacy, she thought. one with clean lines and glossy finishes, like the buildings they designed. But beneath every structure, no matter how refined, lay foundations. And Emma had just begun to dig. Emma waited 3 more days before deciding to bring the materials forward. She knew it had to be done carefully. There was no guidebook for this kind of moment. No line item in any employee handbook for how to confront the history your own company refused to acknowledge. She organized the scanned images, annotated the entries from Bernard Cleary's notebook, and compiled them into a single, well-formatted document. The tone was clinical, factual, with footnotes and timestamps. She avoided opinion. She wasn't trying to accuse, only the present. Still, the weight of it felt heavier than anything she had drafted in architecture school. She scheduled a meeting with her manager under the pretext of discussing a potential discovery relevant to company heritage. Richard Lane, one of the firm's founders, was a man known for his sharp instincts and spotless suits. His reputation in industry was both feared and admired. When Emma stepped into his office that afternoon, sunlight poured across the floor-to-ceiling windows, and a model of a recent urban renewal project sat illuminated at the center of his long glass table. He gestured for her to sit, glancing briefly at her file. "You mentioned something interesting about the building?" "Yes," Emma replied, placing a printed version of her findings on the table. "I believe there are historical elements in the rear of the building that were part of a segregated infrastructure. I found original plans, memos, and some personal documentation. It's substantial. I think it might be worth preserving, possibly incorporating into a historical installation. There's context here that matters." Richard leaned back in his chair. His face remained unreadable as he flipped through a few pages. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he closed the folder and folded his hands together. "This is thorough," he said. "But Emma, this building's been through 4 major renovations. It's had tenants before us. We can't be responsible for the past mistakes of other entities. We're an architecture firm, not a museum." "I understand," she said calmly, "but we're also designers of space. What we choose to include or exclude says something. There's value in acknowledging that history, especially when it's tied to the building we represent every day." He tilted his head slightly. "We have a diversity committee, Emma. We support initiatives, mentorships. That's where this sort of thing belongs, not in the front lobby." "That hallway wasn't just a hallway," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "It was a line that people were forced to stay behind. We walk past it every day and pretend it's just old plumbing and storage. It's more than that." Richard tapped a finger on the edge of the folder. "What do you want to do with this?" "I'm asking that we consider preserving the space, acknowledging it publicly. There's potential to create something meaningful. A small gallery, a plaque, a memorial space." He didn't answer immediately. Then, with a tone she had heard before, measured, professional, and final, he said, "Emma, this is your first month. Focus on your projects. You're doing good work. Don't lose sight of why you're here." The conversation ended as politely as it began. She walked out his office feeling hollow. No reprimand, no anger, just dismissal. A calm rejection dressed in respectability. Over the next few days, she noticed a shift in the air. Conversations with certain co-workers grew shorter. Some smiled less. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Nothing overt, but it was enough to confirm what she feared. Word had traveled. She was now the one who brought it up. And bringing it up in a place like this was a quiet trespass. She confided in Ava, a junior designer who had started a few months before Emma, and had quickly become a trusted voice in the maze of the office. They had bonded over late edits, bad coffee, and their shared sense that architecture, at its best, wasn't just about aesthetics but ethics. Emma laid out the documents one evening after hours. Ava read them silently, her brow furrowed. "This is real?" she asked. "Every word," Emma said. "Photos, too. I have more in backup files." Ava sat back. "This building's been hiding a lot. You think anyone else knew?" "I think some did," Emma said, "or at least suspected. But no one wants to go looking." Ava looked at her for a moment, then said, "Then maybe we should." Later that week, Malcolm joined them, and in turn the research department sharp, observant, and unafraid of discomfort. With his help, they created a digital repository. They scanned the documents properly, created side-by-side comparisons of past and current floor plans, and cataloged every piece of the history Emma had uncovered. They gave a name, the South Corridor Project. At first, it was just for them, but it didn't stay that way. One night, Ava posted a private link to the repository in an internal chat thread about forgotten spaces in architecture. The next morning, a quiet ripple moved across the office. Emma noticed it in the way people hovered over their screens a little longer. By lunch, a senior designer asked her, offhandedly, "So you're the one who found those files?" Emma nodded. "Interesting stuff," the woman said. "But you know how these things go. People forget. We build new." Emma didn't reply, but she heard the message clearly. Let it go. Still, the conversation had begun. A junior associate from another floor asked if he could read more. An admin assistant offered to help catalog other historic areas in the building. Curiosity began to bloom, quietly, cautiously. But not everyone was pleased. Heather, her immediate manager, called Emma in for a meeting at the end of the week. "This is sensitive, Emma," Heather said, her voice low but firm. "We have to think about optics. Our clients, the firm's image." Emma didn't argue. Instead, she handed her a printed map of the building with annotations of the original segregation lines. "You don't have to make it political," Emma said. "Just truthful." Heather looked at the map, then back at Emma. "You're smart," she said, "but sometimes being right isn't the same as being wise." Emma left the room without speaking. That night, she stayed late again. The office lights dimmed around her, and the corridors emptied one by one. She returned to the service hallway, standing where the second reception room once stood. Her fingers traced the outline of where a doorframe used to be. The drywall was newer there, evidence of a sealed past. She pulled out her phone and took another picture. Then she looked up at the narrow ceiling, the pipes above, the dim light struggling to stay lit. This space had held lives, names, moments. Now it held dust and memory. What had begun as discomfort had become something else, something that refused to be unremembered. Emma knew now that her work at Arden and West wasn't just about the design she was assigned. It was about the stories she refused to let disappear. By the following week, Emma knew she could no longer wait for institutional permission. The passive resistance from her superiors had made it clear. The company would not initiate change unless forced to respond to it. The hallway, the history, the silence, it would all be swept back into obscurity if she didn't act. So, with Ava and Malcolm's help, she started drafting something that would be difficult to ignore. Not another memo, not a research file. This time, it was a formal proposal. They met in the evenings, staying behind after the office lights dimmed and the floors emptied. Their conversations grew more intense, more focused. What began as a small act of documentation had evolved into something larger, a call for recognition. For architecture to serve not only as a canvas for vision, but also as a mirror for truth. Emma drafted the language of the proposal with precision, guided not only by historical facts, but by the ethical principles they all believed the firm claimed to represent. She wasn't asking for a symbolic nod to the past. She was proposing a structural intervention, something physical, visible, lasting. The plan was bold but not ostentatious. They would transform a neglected rear hallway into a permanent public installation, a memorial gallery within the firm's own walls. The space would showcase the original blueprints, the photographs of segregated access points, Bernard Cleary's handwritten journal entries, and the names of early Black and Latino professionals whose access had been limited to that forgotten corridor. It would include interactive elements, archival timelines, and even audio recordings of interviews they had begun to collect from retired workers and building staff. They titled it The Passageway, honoring forgotten routes. Emma's cover letter framed the project as both an act of restoration and an opportunity for the firm to lead by example, by acknowledging its inherited history, not hiding it. She emphasized that the initiative aligned with Arden and West's published mission of inclusivity and community-conscious design. The proposal was direct, respectful, but unyielding in its purpose. The day they submitted the packet, They sent it not only to Richard and the senior board, but also, strategically, to the company's internal newsletter editor and a well-respected local architectural journalist known for her pieces on urban memory and hidden histories. Within 24 hours, the article was live. The headline was impossible to ignore. Chicago's most celebrated design firm confronts its hidden past. The story spread quickly, first through niche design circles, then into broader civic forums. Online, the article was shared across social platforms, and the comments flooded in. Some were skeptical, others supportive, but the overwhelming response was one of curiosity and concern. Former employees chimed in. Historians offered context. Community leaders asked questions. The building, once a silent monolith, had become a conversation. By the second day, a group of staff gathered informally near the main lobby to discuss what they had read. Emma walked by, hearing snippets of the article repeated aloud. Someone asked if the hallway was still accessible. Another mentioned the plaque Emma had photographed. For the first time since she'd started, people were talking openly, not just about architecture, but about the stories buildings carry and who gets to enter through which door. Then came the internal backlash. Richard summoned her again. This time, his calm demeanor was less controlled. "You went outside the chain of command," he said, his voice sharper than before. "You published internal materials. You put this firm in a difficult position." Emma sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. "I sent a proposal," she replied evenly. "No confidential client information, no trade secrets. Just history, our building's history, public history." He exhaled hard, pushing back in his chair. "There are better ways to make your mark here, Emma. Quiet ways, productive ways." Emma looked at him, unblinking. "Quiet ways are what built that hallway." He didn't answer. Later that afternoon, the firm's internal systems flooded with replies to the proposal. The diversity committee requested an emergency session. Junior staff began organizing an internal letter of support. A few senior designers, those who had remained silent, suddenly became more vocal, some calling for an open discussion forum. The board scheduled an emergency meeting. Despite the discomfort she had stirred, Emma wasn't isolated. Ava, Malcolm, and others stood with her. Staff from other departments began approaching them, sharing stories, offering help. One assistant revealed that her grandmother had cleaned offices in the same building during the 1970s and remembered the segregated entrances. Another junior designer confessed she had walked through the back entrance on her first day too and felt something was wrong, but had shrugged it off. Now it all made sense. The pressure mounted. Media inquiries reached the firm's press office. Clients asked questions. A local university's Department of History reached out, requesting access to the documents. What Emma had once found buried behind broken chairs and moldy boxes was now headline material. At the end of the week, the board released a statement. Arden and West recognizes the significance of the discoveries made by its staff concerning the building's complex past. "We are actively reviewing the proposal submitted regarding a commemorative installation and remain committed to dialogue, reflection, and transparency." It wasn't a promise, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall. That weekend, Emma returned to the building alone. The streets were quieter, the air warmer. She used the main entrance this time, not out of defiance, but to complete a circle. She walked past the pristine reception, past the polished floors, and took the elevator down to the service hallway. With a flashlight, she traced the walls again, finding the rough seams where doors had once opened, where lives had once moved in the shadows, a system now unwillingly revealed. She stood in the center of the hallway and imagined it not as it was, but as it could be, lit, honored, acknowledged, not erased, not painted over, but remembered in steel and glass and light. She imagined students walking through it, guided tours, quiet reflection. She imagined the names on the wall. In that silence, she felt something shift, not in the walls, but in herself. The weight of having spoken up, of having named what others refused to see, was still present, but it was no longer hers to carry alone. Emma took out her notebook, the same one she had used since architecture school, and wrote a single sentence. "Design is not what we build. It's what we choose not to bury." As summer edged into fall, change began to ripple through Arden and West, not as a quiet trickle, but as an undeniable surge. Emma arrived early on a Monday morning to find the main lobby bathed in soft golden light. Staff gathered in low clusters, murmuring about something different. Her inbox had filled overnight with meeting requests, media follow-ups, and internal invitations. What had been abstract anxiety only days before now took shape in tangible momentum. At 9 o'clock sharp, the boardroom doors swung open. Behind them sat the firm's executive committee, flanked by HR, the Diversity Council, and a local historian invited to consult on the proposed installation. Heather and Richard were present too, each wearing expressions that balanced cautious optimism and the weight of institution responsibility. Emma, Ava, and Malcolm joined them at the table, faces steady, hearts pounding. The chair of the board, Morgan Ellis, spoke first, voice calm but firm. Over the past week, with the strength of your proposal and the public dialogue it has generated, we've had time to consider what this means, not only for our building, but for who we are as designers. She paused, folding her hands. We will approve the passageway, honoring forgotten routes. More than that, we believe it must be done with intention and led by Emma, if you are willing. Emma felt something shift inside her. She nodded, careful to keep composure. I would be honored to lead the project, she replied, with help from Ava, Malcolm, and anyone else who wants to connect the space to our firm's values. An audible breath filled the room. Richard exhaled, lean shoulders softening. Heather offered a tight smile. Let's make sure we do this right, she said, containing emotion carefully. True to the commitment, renovation began within weeks. Contractors carefully removed drywall, exposing the original brick wall and the ghost of the former reception's arched doorway. Beneath chipped paint, faint pencil inscriptions appeared, names and dates, signatures of staff from the 1960s, preserved in the substrate of history. Emma and her collaborators documented each mark before preserving them under a layer of clear sealant. The construction team installed warm, minimalist display cases, gallery quality, lighting soft in the basement corridor, and simple benches invited pause. At the center, a bronze plaque was mounted. Here stood a corridor of segregation, now transformed into a pathway of remembrance and inclusion. The opening ceremony was intimate and powerful. Not only firm staff attended, but local historians, journalists, and former employees, some now in their 70s, came to witness what had been brought into the open. One elderly woman leaned on a cane as she traced the plaque's edge, tears glistening. I remember being told, back then, that I wasn't welcome in the front, she said softly. But walking through now, with this in place, it feels like truth and apology built into the wall. Emma watched, breath tight in her throat. She knew the hallway's restoration had brought more than aesthetic transformation. It had changed the firm's inner orbit. Strategic meetings began with acknowledgement of institutional legacy. Mentorship initiatives explicitly included alumni and staff of color. Research funds were allocated to explore other hidden stories of Chicago architecture. Emma was promoted to lead a new inclusion by design initiative that would consult on heritage projects in other cities. Months later, the building formally reopened. A local architecture magazine featured the story, highlighting how a once-forgotten hallway had become a space of reckoning. Students from a university downtown toured the installation as part of a seminar on memory and design. In the evenings, the corridor glowed gently, visible through glass doors, inviting reflection rather than passage. One cold evening in December, Emma stood alone in the corridor. Outside, lights twinkled over the city skyline. Inside, she traced her fingers across the smooth bronze plaque. The corridor no longer smelled of damp and dust, but carried the faint warmth of reclaimed history. She thought of Bernard's journal, the photos, the plaque, the faces now named. All of it preserved. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo, imagining the moment ahead. Her presentation to a national architectural forum, where she would speak about confronting the built environment's legacies, about how architecture can be justice made tangible. The transformation was more than physical. It was the heart of the firm turned toward honesty. That hallway, once a symbol of exclusion, now stood as proof of what the firm and its people could become when they chose to see beneath surfaces. Emma walked out through the front door, stepping into the winter street. She felt the city's cold, bright breath on her face, and inside, the glow of something enduring. Memory restored, responsibility acknowledged, and a path forwards built from truth.